Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about how to use the API, ADM Cloud's API, and that allows us to read and write information into ADM Cloud using any modern software development tool. Um, the ADM Cloud's API is a modern uh, web service-based REST-based API that allows us to call different endpoints in the ADM Cloud API and interchange information via JSON or any other standard uh, formatting. Okay, so this is the main ADM Cloud web page. Well, you can see a lot of information about how to use the system. Uh, Specifically, if you go to more in an API, you will jump into the REST API page where you can see tools and the specific steps that you have to go through in order to use the API. The steps are very simple, and I'm going to explain it first and then show you a demo on how to use it. First, there's a concept of integration inside ADM Cloud that you have to create, and that will generate a unique ID that will identify your integration. Then you can call the different API endpoints using the programming language of your choice. And, it's a very standard way. You can either communicate with the web service endpoints via basic authentication. You can authenticate via authentication, that is a standard authentication mechanism, and you can also use token authentication. Um, you can read more about basic authentication by clicking this link here. That will jump you into Wikipedia web page explaining how to use basic authentication. But as I mentioned, that's a common mechanism to authenticate users into using web services, same as token authentication. Um, After you all make all the calls to the APIs, then you can read our documentation and you can access it here in order to see all the different endpoints that are available. And also we include a sample program in C Sharp where you can see how we can call the different endpoints. So let's go straight into it and start using the API. I'm going to go again to the main web page and I'm going to press login to log into the software. This will jump to the login page. I enter my username and my password. I just press OK. And I see here the list of companies that I have access to. If you don't have access to any company, you can create one from scratch just by pressing this button here. And I'm going to into this first one that is the demo company that I'm going to use for the integration. Lastly, when I log into ADM Cloud, if I am linked to multiple user groups or multiple roles, then I can select the one that I'm going to use right here. This may show only one option for you in case you haven't been linked to multiple roles. I'm gonna select this one, that is the administrator's role, in order to make the connection. Okay, so the first step, as you saw in our web page, is create an integration, and this is on here. I go to configuration, administration, sorry, customization, and then I go into web services integration. This is a list of the integrations I have created. It's best practice to create at least an integration for each software that you're going to integrate with ADM Cloud. For example, let's say you want to integrate a point of sale software, you use an integration for that. Let's say you want to integrate another tool that is a payroll software, you create a different integration for that. This one that is created as a test, I'm gonna delete it in fact to start from scratch. And I press the new button to create a new integration. I press a new button. I put a name on integration. Let's call this API test integration. I'm gonna call it. I can disable it in case I want to stop it from being used by external software temporarily. If not, and I can enable again, but I'm gonna just press save to have the integration saved. So I have to take note of different informations now that I have the integration created. the first thing I have to take notice of is the integration ID. That is this code here that uniquely identifies our integration. Also, the company ID is useful. You have to take note of this. You're gonna use it later. Most companies have this type of notation for the company ID. I'm using an old company that is have a text. That's no problem. You can go back to the documentation here also. And this here in the detail, we have some samples on how to make a request. A, an endpoint request or an API, and a REST service API works very similar as a normal URL. In fact, when you get information from a software, you typically call an address like this one here. The benefits of getting information from the software is that you can test it in just the same browser where you're working in. If if you're going to insert or update or delete information in ADM clouds, then there are other mechanisms that are a bit more difficult to replicate in a simple web browser. But any person that is familiar with endpoints and web services integration should be also familiar with this. So we have samples on the address I can use to call a list of customers to get a list of vendors, list of items, service search out of accounts, and etc. That is those samples to get list of information from ADM Cloud. And I'm gonna put this a bit bigger, and you can see the structure of the calls. There is a common uh, uh, endpoint, a common address that this the ADM Cloud API address that is api.admcloud.net/API. After that, I have to put the information that I want to get from the software. In this case, is the customers. Then I put this sign to start putting the parameters that the call needs. The first one is a skip parameter, and that indicates ADM Cloud that I want to get a list of customers uh, without skipping anyone. It's very common when you get a list of information that you put a skip in order to uh, to make jumps between pages. For example, if I have 1,000 customers and I want to get the customer from ADM Cloud, um, if I press here, it would get me back the 1,000 customers. That would be too much information. So typically, these list APIs just return 50 records, and if I want to get records 51 to 100, for example, I just put a 15 skip, and that will skip me the first 50 customers. Um, then I pass the integration ID with the app ID parameter. This is the same integration code that I got when I created integration. And then I pass the company ID, this demo premium that uniquely identifies our current company. And finally, I pass the name of the role that I selected on the login page. And that role will be used by the API to understand the security and privileges that I have access into ADM Cloud. So yeah, you have to put the role that you will impersonate when using the integration. But how to test this is very simple. I just press click, and you can see that this will return a JSON string, and that is the as I mentioned, the common format that is used in on the internet on web service integration to interchange information. Um, all API responses in our API have a similar structure. I'm going to collapse this, and you can see we have a JSON text with three parameters. First parameter indicates if the call was successful or not. I get a true. And in the case that it was not successful, then I will get a message explaining why the call was not successful. If it was successful, I will get a data parameter, and that parameter changes. It's another JSON that lists whatever the endpoint returned. In this case, I was calling an endpoint that will return me the list of customers. So this data will have a collection of objects, collection of customers, where I can read the information of each one. this is standard notation in JSON to get a collection. I'm gonna collab this, and you can see that I got two customers in this list, and this, the first customer is here. I get all the information of this customer, the internal ID, name, first name, and all the information, all the fields that are on the customer's page. And then I have the second customer here. It's normal that you will get a lot of parameters that you may not see in the web page because some are internal. That's very normal. So how did I call this endpoint and got this data? Because I was not I didn't pass my credentials to the API. I didn't authenticate to this API, but I had the browser previously open before, and the browser asked me for my username and password. I just entered it, and that's why it worked. But the first time that you will call an API, it will use the basic authentication, and it will ask you with a dialog for your username and password. So this is a way to call the API using basic authentication. Um, the problem with basic authentication, and that's one of the reasons that modernly is being discouraged, is because you have to pass your username and password on each request. So that's why token authentication now is a more preferred way to authenticate with web services. It's a matter of security reasons. So how do I use this? First of all, let's go to the API documentation. You can press this link to go to the API documentation. And I have my link open right here. And this API documentation lists all the endpoints that are available in Adm Cloud. And for each one, you can see the operations that you can execute on each endpoint. Um, most endpoints explain themselves very well. For example, if I want to get a list of customers, I use the customers endpoint. If I want to see a list of employees, if I want to see a list of uh, cash invoices, you can look it up here in the API. Let's go again to customers. And I'm going to do another sample on using the API with web basic authentication using this tool. And after that, we'll go to a sample of using token authentication. I have all the methods that the customer's endpoint supports. The get methods are methods to obtain information from the API. Post method is to insert information. Put is to update, and delete is to delete information. So if I want to get a list of customers, I will use this endpoint. This is the one that we just use in the sample. If I want to get information from a specific customer, I could use this endpoint. This is to create a customer, this is to modify a customer, and this is to delete a customer. So this tool allows me to play with the API in a very simple way. For example, I'm going to go to get API customers, and here you see that the tools allow you to specify what parameters are expected by the endpoint so you can test it. In black, in bold, you will see the required parameters. Also here it says required. And since this is the endpoint to get the list of customers, you need to specify the skip. If I want to get the first page of the first 50 customers, I just put 0 and skip. Remember, if I want to skip the 50 first customers, I just put 50 here, and that's how it's done. So the second parameter that is going to be required is the company name. This is information that you got from the API integrations page that I mentioned that this was useful. You also need to put the role. Remember that the role was administradores in this case. You have to put also app ID, that is integration ID. You can leave the token empty because this information is used when you want to use token authentication. Then you can press try it out and see that it worked. It's here. You get a sample on how to call this endpoint using curl. That is a common, well-known tool. Also, you can see the request URL completely that you will have to call. This will be put in the software that you are going to use to invoke the API, and this is a request response body where you, with the structure that I'll already explain, that is the success message and data uh, uh, fields. So it's a very simple way to call the API. Um, so how to use this with token authentication? We're going to refresh the page so we empty all information, and there's a special endpoint in here. It's on the login. It's a login endpoint, and this login endpoint you can use it to do a lot of things. You can simulate a normal login onto the software just supplying username and password. You can there's a method to get the roles that a user have access to. There's a method to get the companies that the user have access to. But the one I'm gonna use here is the API token. Um, endpoint. So if you're going to use token authentication, the first endpoint that you should call is this one, API token. This will give you the token back, and once you get the token, then you can use that token to call other web services. So what does this token endpoint requires? It requires you the company name. You remember that is Demo Premium. It will require you the role ID and the role name, and this is because of some it requires both informations because some backward compatibility, but this will change in the future, requiring just one of the information because supplying both of them is really redundant. So this is the role ID and this is the role name. The role name is, as you remember, administradores. I was using a Spanish role name, but this can be whatever the name you use in the role. And it's also going to require the role ID. Where do you get the role ID? You can go to the software. You can go to configuration, security, user groups. This is you will see the list of user group. This is the user group that we're going to use. If I click on this user group, you will see the ID in the top of the web browser here. This code here is the role ID. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go again to the API tool and put it here, and it's done. I have the role ID and the role name. Finally, I have the app ID. You can press try it out, and you got a response. So by using this first um, endpoint, you will log into the system. This method requires basic authentication. So when you use this one the first time, it will ask you for a username and password. If you use this in a software in a programming language, you have to supply username and password using basic authentication. But this is going to be the last time that you use basic authentication because now we're going to use this token instead of supplying credentials with basic authentication. So I'm going to copy this token here. This is my token, and your software should save this token um, uh, um, after calling this endpoint because this token is the one that you're going to use to call another method. Keep in mind that tokens expire, so it has a specific uh, time that is useful. So your application should have the logic to recall this endpoint to get a new token in case that the old token that was supplied to you already expired. So I'm going to use this token now. I'm going to go again to the customers uh, uh, endpoint to get a list of customers. These required parameters have always you always have to fill it. I'm going to put 0 again here. And you remember that when using basic authentication, we have to supply the company, the role, and the app ID. And it also requires username and password. In this case, if you use this API, even the first time, you will notice that just by supplying the token and anything else, you will get a response back. So in this case, you supply the token, you don't have to supply the company, you don't have to supply the role, the app ID, and this will not require you to pass username and password via basic authentication. So you just try it out, and it will get you the same information you got when using the basic authentication mechanism. So this is it. Um, you can play with all these endpoints to get information, update, insert, delete information from Adm Cloud, and you connect your special software with Adm Cloud. You can use this to connect different point of sale, CRM, sales system, whatever system you think will get some benefit from connecting to Adm Cloud. If you have any questions about this, you can write us. You can send us a chat, send us an email, and we'll be happy to explain you or answer your questions about our web API. Thank you for watching.